I mean, in a way, it brings in the really thinking about where the lifespan of the work. That brings in a couple of things, actually. I mean, one of them is the idea that it's interesting. You're talking about that work in the writer's house and casting the words in lead, because that idea of cast, it's almost like as if the word itself is a kind of trigger and a stimulus, and something that itself lasts. When I think all the way through to Georgina, the notion of cast and casting
well, I did a
is
piece
very
which I
big.
didn't show an image of, which is me casting the dictionary definition of gravity to all the words in the dictionary, made in my handwriting and in lead. I threw them off the White Cliffs of Dover, and then they landed on the rocks, and I got retrieved them, and then they're all tangled up, mangled, because you couldn't read them anymore, because real gravity had, decapitated, the man-made, structure. And so I exhibited the tangle of words, and it's called Words That Define Gravity.
And it's almost like there's sort of cruciform. It's suspended on the floor, but quite low.
As a cross. But I that piece is lost. I don't know.
Where is that piece?
I don't know. If it's
But the other thing that relates to that piece,
got melted down to make another one.
In one way, it's almost as if the word touch comes up a lot as well. The tactile, very, very much part of your. But it's almost as if the words themselves touch something, touch a narrative. You cast something in lead, and you keep on casting.
Yeah.
And casting has all that great, all sorts of associations. As you say, you cast it off the cliff. Casting, you cast spells, you cast a count.
Yes, and I love
Casting
drawing. Drawing metal and drawing things out, drawing meanings out.
Absolutely. Which brings me to another point, which is, and that's something I never have actually asked you, which is, I was writing down actually while you were talking, the titles of the works, and thinking, and especially, and I know you're interested in Duchamp in particular, but thinking about what that relationship is amongst the titles of your work. And I think I said to you before that I'd been thinking a lot about Eva Hesse in the last couple of years. Thinking about, she was there's been quite a lot written about Eva Hesse's titles. But with you, language itself is one of the places where the work gets transliterated, translated, transformed, realised. How important is that?
Oh, it's hugely important. I love titles. And I think it's almost, imagine having a newspaper full of images but no captions. So it's almost like, somehow I think words, and I love the museum for that. You'll have a look at some mangled bit of something or other, and then it said, a bit of Messerschmitt shot down over, sorry, and such and such, and then it becomes alive. And I love that captioning. And I never put a caption with a work that's not true. For me, it's all very factual in a way. That
well, you've used two kinds of captions. You've used that, like Messerschmitt shot down 1944 or whatever, or the equivalent. But the other one is that you never use these one-word titles or short phrases. They never quite describe the work. They describe the work obliquely.
Well, they're more like a lembo thing. But I collect titles, found titles. Neither From Nor Towards is from T.S. Eliot's Burnt Norton. Matter and What It Means. It's from kids' encyclopedias. It's the title of the chapter. And I just 30 Pieces of Silver from the Bible, and I collect these titles. And sometimes I don't know what they're going to be, but I just collect them as an object almost. So I have a little sketchbook and I write down my titles.
And they're almost like a form in a way of archaeology too.
Yes.
I remember thinking when I first wrote about 30 Pieces of Silver, I think I said something like, it exists between inventory and excavation. And I think that's still true.
Yes, it is. And I think it's... and for me, the titles, The Folkestone Mermaid, which is what I call this piece, which is one of my least... It's just a very simple descriptive title. And I had all kinds of titles, but I thought in the end, actually, no, I'm going to give... People can make their own titles up for this work in a way. I could have called it Georgina Baker or... but I wanted it to tie it into the Copenhagen Mermaid. So it was just this is Folkestone's, and this is not H.G. Wells wrote a book called The Sea Lady in Folkestone, which is about a mermaid, but she's a siren. She lures men to her death. So it's kind of, so I want them just I think it's somehow a public work, and I think people can give it nicknames or whatever. So in a way, I always like to think there's a space there in the work for the viewer, and I don't really want to fill up my work with my meaning, because meaning is constantly shifting. Yeah,
and in a way that also relates to something else, which is there's definitely a relationship to performance, there's a relationship to time and gesture, and that's again always, I think, been very present in the work. Is that something you're aware of, something you kind of think about?
Yeah, I think there is definitely I think my work is almost like an oral work. The work itself might be a residue of process, and then you end up with something that people can see, but there's a lot of negotiation going on, with me, with my mermaids, or with the army or whoever. And I think there's a lot of backstory which people don't need to know, but and it might be there in the caption, thanks to the British Army, for blowing up the shed. Or
well, that's very interesting, because I think, again, thinking about performance, it's often, especially the sort of performance that we know and kind of experimental avant-garde kind of tradition, it's often invested with a backstory that you feel in some way, again, thinking about the unconscious, that somehow comes through. Because people really relate to your work, often in a tactile, emotional way. They're relating to that sense of, what would you call that, kind of investment that's already gone into it. It's very resonant.
But I mean, I think I would love to say being a musician, because musicians make songs or write music, and people don't really think, oh, what was this person thinking when they were doing it? Okay, Bob Dylan, you can tell, or whoever, through the lyrics, but those are poetry with music. I mean, somehow, and people have very personal relationships to music, which I hope, I'd like that to be the same about art, that everybody has personal relationships with books or with music, and art should be the same, that you don't have to worry really about what the artist's intention was. In a way, that's, it might change from day to day.
If I was to ask you the most crass question of all, then, is like, what's the work saying? What would you say to them?
I haven't got a clue. It will say different things on different days.
Yeah. Okay, it says different things on different days. And at that point then, I think I might actually think about starting to open it up to all of you and think about some of the sort of questions that that you might want to ask. But actually, they might not necessarily be questions. I think it's sometimes very hard to ask a fully formed question of an artist. But, I mean, things like reactions to the work. I mean, I'd be very interested to know what works people have seen, or what reactions people might have had to seeing 30 Pieces of Silver now. I mean, who's been to it and who hasn't, and had anybody seen it before? Like, I first saw it in the British Art Show in 1988, 1989?
1990.
Was it 1990?
At the Hayward.
At the Hayward. And it was shown in a very different way. So I was kind of thinking that this time when I saw it at St Mary's that it had a really different, much more intimate feel. So has anybody else seen that work before, or had particular, just kind of emotional reactions or sort of reaction to seeing it? Has anybody seen it, actually?
Well, I was going to actually go back to the shed, because I remember when I saw the shed and Tate, and what I got was, I had one of those. Those little plastic toys or something like that, and that immediately took me to thinking, my dad keeping things in a shed, because everybody does a garden shed or equivalent, don't they? So actually, although it was objects suspended very beautifully, it was actually people that came over, because it's people that keep those objects. For me, it was my dad down the garden. Why would he keep an old potty? Why do people keep these things? But they mean something in archaeology, isn't it, of a childhood and a life.
And what did you feel when you saw that work then exploded? Did you feel, because it could be seen as quite aggressive, but how did it, how do you think?
I think it was the beauty of the movement, because obviously that doesn't come over here in the slides, does it? But when they move, I think it gives it was just very slowly turning, so it wasn't destroyed somehow. It had another life.
In fact, I noticed yesterday in St Mary's that some of the pools actually do slightly move. There's a feeling, I mean, you've talked about breath and exhale and inhale, and some things kind of feel like they are literally
they move by the people,
suspended.
The currents of air.
Yeah,
I mean, it's your presence that makes them move in a way. But I like them not being fixed.
Yeah.
Because when I did the blown up shed, I had all the debris on the floor, and then it looked quite sad. It looked a bit like a morgue or something. And then when I put them in the air, it reanimated them, and they didn't become about death. They became about something else.
But there was a choice, because I was thinking, did she select all those? How did she? Somebody actually.
All those hair curlers. I remember where I got those from. I remember where I got all the objects from.
Well, that's a very interesting question, I think, as well, about, in terms of process, whether something is mere juxtaposition. And you certainly suggested that when you looked at the work, you said quite several times, this is actually organised. And there's a little story maybe of actually you the night before showing 30 Pieces of Silver at the Icon had to actually identify everything that was in each pool.
Well, I had cut these 30 circles, and I had to lay all the objects, fragments, thousands of pieces onto the, because we had to make a plan because anything that's got 4 holes in it, you have to have a plan. So on the ceiling, where those 4 holes go. You can't just put random wires down. So I had to draw, and I only really worked this out, on the spot. Think, oh my God, I've got to make 2 plans, one for the ceiling, one for the floor, for every single object. So I got these circles, laid the objects out very quickly, and drew around them, spending about 10 minutes on each circle, not knowing that that was the way it was going to be fixed forever. You know, so the Tate still got the same plans.
It's an interesting thing, actually, where things are fixed forever when they come. Can I just take you?
I was interested in what Cornelia said about being surprised that one of the children had ended up here in York, and you went to the Tate lent it.
Oh yeah, yes.
And so I wanted to ask what your response was to the context of its being in St Mary's.
Well, it's very different. Yeah, I like the idea of that. I like, you know, the work can move around and have different meanings in different places, shown over gravestones, you know, and then it's almost like the Last Reckoning or something. You know, it's got a much more portentous sort of, you know, I mean, it's kind of much more emotional, really, So I'm happy. I'm happy as long as it's displayed. Because I give rules of, you know, that you can show it in a grid, but the grid could be all kinds of shapes, but it's got to be within this parameter, and it can be in any context. It was shown once in Paris in a space which had the floor was made of stones from the Bastille. You know, when the Bastille fell, they'd use these stones to flag this space, and I love that. You know, the idea of the French Revolution and the Bastille. I was born on Bastille Day, but you know, the 30 pieces took on a different resonance, like "Let them eat cake" or something. You know, I mean, it was a kind of had a different. So I'm quite happy for the work to carry on, and I mean, I love Beckett, for example, but his plays get reinterpreted all the time, and they're. Although he has strict rules about how they perform, they can have very different meanings depending on what the politics. I mean, I think Susan Sontag did it in Sarajevo, Waiting for Godot, you know, with lots of people playing the same part. And so that's just being reinterpreted. So I think hopefully the work can be reinterpreted by the context.